Welcome to Postcards from Barnesville. I'm Pamela Morris, that witchy chick. This is the place where I will share some of the short stories I've written over the years that may otherwise spend their dark lives feeling lonely and unloved. And nobody wants that. Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Postcards from Barnesville. Lots of people have phobias, those strange, irrational fears that come from seemingly out of nowhere. Fear of heights, fear of clowns, fear of snakes, just to name a couple. Tonight, we're going to meet 9-year-old Helen Spaulding, who suffers from arachnophobia. She absolutely hates spiders, especially that one that she thinks killed and ate the neighbor's dog. I don't know if I can blame her for being afraid of that. But let's see if Helen really has anything to worry about. I call this one Because Spiders. Helen Spaulding was what many people would call a precocious child, which meant she was too smart for her own good sometimes. She could read by the time she was 3. Helen was prone to temper tantrums when grown-ups wouldn't listen to her. She knew what she liked and what she didn't like, and wasn't in the least bit afraid to tell people about it. Helen loved her dollhouse and spent many happy, content hours sitting on the floor, moving the figures about and rearranging the furniture. She also loved riding her bike, making mud pies, thunderstorms, her cat Jethro, and coloring books. Helen did not like mushrooms, having someone else brush her hair, the neighbor's yappy Pomeranian that chased her cat, and she thought blue jays were mean. But most of all, Helen Spaulding did not like spiders. Spiders were wrong in every sense of the word. They had creepy, thread-thin legs, and not just 2, 8. 8 legs that could move any which way the spider wanted them to. They could take slow, delicate steps, or they could scurry in the blink of an eye. Spiders crawled on floors, walls, and most of all, ceilings. They hid upside down in corners. They could flatten themselves to squeeze into the tiniest cracks. Spiders lurked in freshly mown lawns, tall meadow grass, in vegetable and flower gardens, in sheds, garages, and houses. From attic to basement, bathrooms, kitchens, living rooms, and bedrooms, you could find a spider just about anywhere you looked all year long. It was dreadful. It didn't take long for Helen's parents to realize their daughter's fear. Like reading a bedtime story before lights out, checking for spiders in Helen's room became a nightly routine. She had to check in her closet and under her bed, between the sheets and blankets as well as beneath the pillow. The upper corners of her room were swept just to make extra sure there were no cobwebs up there a spider might use to swing down and dangle over Helen as she slept. In time, even this would not prove enough. 6-year-old Helen insisted on having mosquito netting wrapped over her bed just in case. Nothing was worse than laying in bed in the dark, looking up and wondering if there was a spider about to land on your face. By the time she was 9, Helen was old enough and big enough to help her mother in the kitchen. Real pies were a lot better than ones made of mud. Helen loved rolling meatballs and putting them in the frying pan too. Go get a couple jars of tomatoes. I'm going to teach you how to make Grandma's spaghetti sauce today. Helen was thrilled at the idea until she realized that getting the tomatoes meant going into the cellar, and that meant spiders. But there are spiders down there, she whined. There are spiders everywhere. They won't bother you. Helen's heart was already racing. Do I have to? No tomatoes, no sauce. She really wanted to learn how to make the sauce. Helen tried to be brave. She didn't like being afraid of spiders. She just was. Helen opened the basement door, turned on the light switch, and looked down the steep steps. Webs dangled on the walls. No doubt their creators sat tucked into the darkest corners, just waiting for Helen to pass by. They'd jump out. Their horrible legs would touch her skin. They'd crawl up her arms and get in her hair. Helen took a step back, heart racing and tears already starting to flow. "I can't do it, Mom," she said. The fear was simply too much. "All right, but you really need to get over this phobia, honey." Mom wiped off her hands and, while Helen watched, walked right down the steps between the spider web drapes, grabbed the needed jars, and came back up without any incident. "See, easy peasy." "Maybe for you." Helen frowned, switched off the light, closed the door, and returned to the kitchen. Weeks later, Helen gathered up her tub toys and headed into the bathroom. Her dad was just adding a generous amount of Mr. Bubble to the steaming, churning water. Bubble baths were right up there on her list of favorite things. She tossed in Barbie and Ken, both suited up with scuba gear, and watched them sink through the layers of white foam, already imagining what adventures they were going to have until the water got too cold to play in. She added a handful of rubber animals that included 2 sharks, a snake, a killer whale, and a dinosaur that resembled the Loch Ness Monster. Helen cast her wary eye into the corners of the shower enclosure and between the curtains. "You checked for spiders, Daddy?" "Coast is clear. Be sure and actually wash yourself. Don't just play," Daddy instructed and headed out, leaving Helen to her tub time. Soon she was absorbed in the make-believe world of Ken and Barbie, diving off the coast of a deserted island, encountering horrible ocean creatures with nothing but Knee Island and a flimsy washcloth raft to keep them safe. "Swim, Barbie, swim!" Helen shrieked in Ken's voice. "It's Nessie!" Barbie climbed onto Helen's jutting right knee just in time. "Hurry, Ken!" Barbie's voice pleaded. Ken splashed frantically. A dark movement caught Helen's eye. It was quick, leaving her only moments to realize what it was and that it was coming right at her. The huge spider scrambled down the inside wall of the shower, not 2 feet away. Helen's scream pierced the bathroom walls as if 1,000 volts of electricity had just struck the surface of the water. She scrambled over the tub's edge just as the spider's front legs hit the rolling white bubbles and began to flail, as if trying to paddle across them. It wanted to kill her. Still screaming, Helen fell onto the floor mat, grabbed her towel, and backed away, hysterical. The spider wasn't faring so well as it tried to reach her. It was too heavy and began to sink, its legs waving wildly skyward as its enlarged abdomen slowly drew it downward. The bathroom door flew open. "What's wrong? What's happened?" Daddy's figure filled the doorway with Mom right behind him. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Mom asked, working her way around her husband to gather the trembling Helen into her comforting arms. Helen was crying too hard to talk, so she pointed to the tub at the last known location of the spider that was at least the size of her father's hand. "What is it?" he asked. Through her muffled sniffles and sobs, Helen was barely able to blurt out, "Spider." Her parents immediately relaxed. Helen, not so much. "What's all the screaming about?" A voice belonging to Helen's 14-year-old brother called from the hall. "Helen saw a spider," her dad replied. "Jesus Christ, what a baby!" Raymond snorted and laughed. "Language!" Mom snapped. Ray's bedroom door closed after a mumbled, "Whatever." "Come on, let's get you dried off and in your bedroom." Mom hugged Helen's shoulders, easing her toward the door. "We'll let Daddy take care of the spider." "It's big, Daddy. Really, really big." "I'm sure it is, baby girl. Now, go on now. I'll handle it. It's probably already drowned." Helen let herself be led away, but she didn't think the spider was drowned. She was certain it was lurking just below the surface of the bubbles. Any second now, Daddy was going to yell as the creature leaped out, latched onto his hand and began to feed on his fingers. Terror crawled under her skin, waiting for that moment. "It's going to get Daddy," she whimpered as her mother worked to dry off Helen's hair. "Daddy's a lot bigger than a spider, honey. He'll be fine. Go pick out the pajamas you want to wear." The last gurgles of the tub draining floated into Helen's bedroom as she pulled her pajama top on over her head. Her father appeared in the doorway holding a towel laden with dolls and rubber sea creatures that he put on the floor by Helen's dollhouse. "Did you get him?" "I couldn't find it. I think it must have gone down the drain." Helen cringed. How could it have gone down the drain? "But it was too big to go down the drain, Daddy. It really was. It was really big." And if it hadn't gone down the drain, where had it gone? Helen almost started crying again at the thought of that thing still crawling around in the house and upstairs. "I rinsed out the tub with extra hot water," Daddy said. "I'm sure it's dead." Helen was not in the least bit convinced and made extra certain her mosquito netting was tucked in tight all the way around her bed that night. Both her parents checked all the usual places before turning the light out, and Mommy even put a draft dog against the base of Helen's closed door on the outside. She should be safe for the night. At least she hoped so. Helen not only survived the night, but well into the fall when the leaves of 2 huge maple trees filled her backyard with their glorious colors of vibrant red, sunny yellow, and brilliant orange. She didn't see the giant spider again and had pretty much decided that maybe her father was right and it had drowned and gone down the drain just like he said. Maybe it was like her mother said and it hadn't been as big as Helen had thought it was. On the other hand, Big Brother Way was not in the least bit helpful. "It probably crawled under the door and into the linen closet while you weren't looking," he taunted. "Or maybe it's hiding in the closet in the spare room waiting to eat the next person who goes in there." "Raymond Duane, stop it!" Helen's mother shouted, overhearing one of any number of stories her son made up to frighten his little sister. "You're supposed to protect your little sister, not scare her. Don't you have anything constructive to do?" Raymond would grumble, call her a brat or a baby or a chicken, and trot off to whatever it was 14-year-old boys did for hours on end with their bedroom doors closed and their stereos turned up loud. Every single time Helen wished she had a nice sister instead. With the rain of leaves came raking, and Helen loved making huge piles in front of the swing set, swinging as high as she could, then leaping off into the heap. Oddly, Jethro the cat was also fascinated by the leaves and would play along with Helen. He didn't jump in from the swing set, of course, but he did like to burrow deep into the special pile she made for him and then suddenly pop up like a kind of feline prairie dog or chase the leaves blowing in the wind. There was only one problem with that sort of play, actually getting the leaf rake out. In the back corner of the property was the garden shed. It wasn't one of those nice metal ones, or even a newly built wooden structure like they used for the lawn tractor and to store snow sleds and bicycles, wheelbarrows, and wagons. No, this solid 5-by-5-foot building started out life a solid 50 years ago as a 2-holer. It had been cleaned, the roof replaced, and the walls straightened back to plumb and painted to match the house. But that was what it was, an old outhouse. Helen's father had nailed wide planks over the holes to make a shelf along with 2 more above for a small garden implements, potting soil, watering cans, flower pots. In here were all the rakes, hoes, shovels, and tree and hedge cutting tools needed to keep Helen's yard all trim and fit and tidy. Here, too, were spiders. "Will you get the rake for me?" she asked her mom. It was Saturday morning with a cloudless blue sky filled with sunshine. Honeybees were making last-ditch efforts to gather what they could from the flowering hostas and blooming goldenrod, while monarch butterflies flitted about, possibly considering their long trek to Mexico. Jethro lounged in the sun on the back deck, eyes closed but ears twitching. "I'm right in the middle of canning, honey. I'm sure you can get it." Helen worried her teeth against her lower lip. please?" Her mother turned from the sink full of canning jars. "Helen, you're almost 10 years old. You can get a rake from the shed by yourself." "But, Mom, there's—" "Helen." That settled it. Dad had gone to the hardware store, and Helen wasn't about to ask Gray to get it for her. Head hung down, Helen trudged her way out the kitchen door and into the backyard. The table was still on the deck, but the chairs were gone and the umbrella taken down. Jethro opened his eyes and flicked his tail a few times, probably at the sound of the constant yapping of the neighbor's dog. He must be tied outside on their porch. Every once in a while you could hear his little paws scratching at their metal storm door to be let back in. The black and white cat made no effort whatsoever to join Helen as she passed by and headed towards the shed. It just watched, its ears flattening in a look of utter annoyance. The shed looked harmless enough, but Helen knew otherwise. Her wide eyes turned to the overhanging soffits. Spiderwebs clung to the corners, weaving their way around abandoned wasp nests. Dad sprayed those all the time, but it didn't keep the spiders away very long. She could see clusters of white egg sacs, pea-sized mostly, all guarded by their mothers of varying sizes. The funnel-shaped web of the giant wolf spider spiraled deep into one corner, the creature's front feet barely visible. Wolf spiders were the worst, them and orb weavers. A film of cold sweat broke out on Helen's forehead. Her hands were trembling and clammy. Maybe she could wait until her dad got home, but that wouldn't be for hours. She shuddered, looked at the door, then back to the spider-packed soffits she'd have to pass under just to lift the latch and gain access. Maybe she could lift it with a stick? The thought sprang her into motion, and it wasn't long before she was back to standing there looking at the shed door, armed and ready. She extended the yard-long branch, nudging the small end against the underside of the latch. The first try proved it could be done, if only she could get at the perfect angle. Helen tried again. Almost. Click! The latch released, allowing the door of the old outhouse to swing silently open halfway. Helen used the stick to push the door fully open before tossing the tool aside. There stood the leaf rake. Its long red tines practically glowed from within the shelter. Now, if only she could grab it. 3 feet, 4 at most, were all that separated her from hours of fun. Helen took a step forward, gaze shifting upward towards breeze-rustled cobwebs that triggered scrawny, skin-crawling legs into motion, making them cling to their precious unborn minions. Helen's stomach tightened. She could do this. Half a step more. One of the 8-legged terrors temporarily lost its grip and slipped a fraction of an inch. Helen jerked back, heart throbbing like a scared rabbit's. "Hold steady," Helen thought. "Just stay right where you are and let me get the rake." The wolf spider had shrunk back into its lair. To hide or prepare itself to spring forward and attack, Helen didn't know and didn't really want to think about too much. Another half step closer. She wasn't quite under the eave, but close. So terrifyingly close. Helen let out a squeak, rushed in, wrapped her fingers firmly around the handle of the rake, and pulled. The tines bent and clung to something. A nail? No. The garden rake's metal teeth gripped the flexible red claws of the one she wanted. Helen yanked again. Let the whole lot come crashing out the door. She didn't care. Metal fought with metal. Wood handles shifted, upsetting webs and spiders and eggs. She growled, lifted the handle as high as she could to pull a third time, saw the hold shift, dozens of red fingers slipped, and a freedom that sent Helen tumbling backwards to land hard on her butt. A skittering of shadow, multi-legged, quivering, and gargantuan, ran across the back wall of the shed as a shovel, hoe, and the obstinate garden rake all fell forward, barely missing Helen's sprawled and backward crab-walking legs. Helen screamed.
not at the idea of being pummeled by sharp and heavy garden equipment, but the image, clear as the bright blue sky above, of a spider twice as big as the one she'd seen in the bathtub months earlier. Helen scrambled to her feet, precious leaf rake in hand, and ran for all it was worth back to what she perceived to be the safety of the raised deck. The sliding glass door opened, and her mother stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What in the world is going on out here?" Spider, Helen sputtered and gulped. "Big spider in the shed." "Oh, for heaven's sake, Helen, this spider thing is really getting ridiculous." "I saw it, Mom. It's as big as a supper plate, I swear." "Then you better go close the door so it can't get out," her mother said with a shake of her head as she turned and went back inside. Go back and close the door? Was her mother insane? Mom had a point, though. What if the spider did decide to come out? What if Helen had made it mad and ruined its web? Helen looked at her cat, who had given up his nap in favor of watching the girl's utter terror. "God, Jethro, what if I made it mad?" He gazed at her with narrowed eyes and let out a long, plaintive mew. "Maybe you can stand guard while I rake." The cat blinked. Jethro was a good hunter. He could down a squirrel and had dragged more than one good-sized snake into the driveway. A spider, even a big one, should be a piece of cake. The cat butted his hand against Helen's leg. Helen took that as the feline equivalent of a fist bump. Raking was laborious, but soon Helen had accumulated a massive pile in front of the swing set. Jethro had taken up his usual post at the top of the slide. Helen climbed onto the swing and began to pump her legs. Back and forth, higher and higher, getting up just enough speed and momentum, and zing! A brown, barking, obnoxious little dog darted across the yard, its short, puffy tail bobbing like a mop-head. Jethro hissed and arched as the neighbor's Pomeranian made a beeline for the swing set. It yapped and snarled and snapped as it tried to first get up on the ladder, then went around to the foot of the slide, only to return to the ladder. "Go away, get!" Helen jumped from the swing and rushed at the dog. It was all the distraction Jethro needed. He leaped over the dog and shot off across the yard, nothing more than a blur of black and white fur. Princess, what a stupid name for a dog, took off after the cat. Helen's pet scrambled up one of the maple trees as easy as you please, while the dog was at once befuddled at what had happened to its playmate. Helen chased after it. She'd probably get bit if she tried to grab it, and she knew she should probably get her mom, or at least run over to the neighbors to tell them that their dog was loose. Princess, easily distracted, quickly lost any interest in Jethro and instead sniffed at the fallen shovel. With its nose down, the dog waddled over closer to the open shed door. Helen didn't like the dog, not one bit, but a sudden drenching cold washed over her. The giant spider was in there. Helen rushed towards the shed. "Get away from there, stupid dog!" Princess lifted her head, gave the quickly approaching child a passing glance, and hopped into the shed to further her exploration. Freedom was a wonderful thing. Helen stopped short. "Get out of there!" she demanded from 10 feet away. The dog ignored her. It was too busy burying its fuzzy little face into the open bag of peat moss. "Scram!" Helen shouted, wishing her mother would come out and see what all the hollering was about. But the sliding glass door remained shut, leaving Helen to wonder if she'd yelled spider one too many times. She turned back. All the color drained from her face. Her stomach churned. She couldn't breathe. Dangling a foot above the oblivious dog was the spider. The spider. She hadn't been seeing things. She hadn't been exaggerating. It really was the size of a dinner plate. "Princess!" Helen's scream seemed to act like the firing shot of a foot race, and the next beat of the girl's heart, the spider dropped, wrapped all 8 of its legs around the little dog, and began its rapid ascent into the dark rafters. "No!" Helen couldn't move. Running in to try and save the animal was out of the question. Instead, she stood in frozen horror, listening to the dog yap and whimper, a desperate whine followed by a loud crack, then silence from places unseen. The next sound that came from Helen's throat brought her mother running. Awareness returned with a jolt to find Helen stretched out on the sofa, draped in a blanket. Her mother sat beside her, holding Helen's hand. "Princess!" Helen started, trying to sit up. "It's okay, relax." Her mother's eyes were full with worry and fear. "Just relax." "But Princess, where's Jethro?" The idea that her curious cat may have fallen victim to the monstrous spider felt like fire in Helen's veins. "Is Jethro?" "Jethro's fine. Her mother began. Where is he?" Frantic, Helen sat up despite her mother's efforts to keep her in a prone and restful position. The black and white cat sat statue-like by the sliding glass door, looking into the back lawn, pale green eyes wide and unblinking. The only thing that indicated he was a real cat was the steady thump, thump, thump of the tip of his tail striking the linoleum-clad floor. Seeing him, Helen lay back down. He was safe. It hadn't gotten him. "What about Princess?" "The neighbor's dog?" Helen's eyes welled with tears. Her throat constricted as the sound of snapping bones echoed in her head. "I didn't see him, honey. Why? What happened? Was he out there with you and Jethro?" Helen managed a nod. "It got him," she whispered. She didn't expect to be believed. "What got him?" The little girl sighed. The other thing, a coyote, I think." What did it matter what got him? They'd say she'd imagined it. Either way, the little dog was dead, and if Helen were being honest, she'd tell her mother that she was glad it had gotten taken away. "Princess was chasing Jethro," she added. "Jethro ran up the tree, but then the coyote came running through the yard. Oh, my God! No wonder you were hysterical and screaming. Oh, my poor Helen, to see something like that." Her mother scooped Helen into her arms and gave her a hug. "It was probably rabid. I'm so glad it didn't go after you." Helen swallowed. "Me too." No matter how hard she tried, Helen couldn't get rid of the images of the giant spiders, nor could she get her mind to stop wondering if it were the same one or if there was a whole colony of them somewhere nearby. Plus, she'd made the big mistake of wondering if they could swim. Yes, she found out thanks to the librarian at school. Some spiders were very good swimmers. Daddy said the first one had gone down the drain, but Daddy also said there weren't any as big as dinner plates around here. Daddy was wrong in the latter. Helen had seen it with her own 2 eyes in broad daylight. Why couldn't he be wrong about the first one, too? And if the first one hadn't drowned, maybe it had somehow gotten to the shed and was twice as big, maybe 10 times as big by now that it had liquefied Princess's corpse and sucked it dry. There wasn't much left of a fly once a spider got done with it. Princess probably looked like a brown withered burdock leaf by now. Helen's lone consolation was that winter was coming, and spiders didn't live long in the cold of the northeast winter until, that is, her brother decided to announce, "Well, that only means there'll be more in the house where it's nice and warm," at the dinner table. "Seriously, Raymond?" His father scowled. "It's true," he retorted. "True or not, you know that's not appropriate to say around your sister." He rolled his eyes. "Whatever." Helen stared at her plate, lips barely visible as she held back the tears that threatened to betray her. He wasn't saying anything she didn't already know, but did he have to keep bringing things up like that? Mom patted Helen's hand. "Ignore him, honey. There won't be any more spiders than usual in the house. In fact, I've actually noticed there are fewer in the basement." "Mom, don't lie to make me feel better." "I'm not lying," she insisted. "There really are less of them." "Yeah, right. May I be excused? I'm done." "Sure, go on. Homework finished?" Helen laughed. "Tomorrow is a snow day." "You don't know that." She giggled. "My homework's done just in case I'm wrong. But I'm not." Helen wasn't wrong about the snow day, and for the first time since Princess's gruesome death, she played outside without a care in the world.
You are listening to Because Spiders by Pamela Morris. If you're enjoying this creepy crawly tale and would like more, visit my website, PamelaMorrisBooks.com, for a full selection of my available novels and collections. The link is in the description below. And now let's get back to the story.
Christmas came and went. The new year started. Helen spent half an hour writing the name of each of her classmates on and signing 23 Valentine's Day cards. Another snow day came later that month. Mom and Dad still had to go to work, which left Ray in charge of his little sister. It was the worst part of snow days, but Helen made do. Her brother would sleep until noon, leaving her to get her own breakfast, not that he would have helped her had he been awake. Sitting cross-legged on the living room floor in front of the TV, Helen stuffed her mouth with frosted flakes. Maybe Ray would actually be nice to her today. She hoped so. He'd said something about going sledding. It would be March soon, and the storm that was only now starting to taper off could be the last of the season. At 12:30, as Helen colored at the coffee table, Ray came thumping down the stairs. Much to her surprise, he was fully dressed, except for his feet. They were bare. "Hey, Brat," he said and smiled, making a beeline to the kitchen. Helen ignored him, the shade of green she was using to color a flower's leaf growing darker as her grip tightened. Raymond made himself a double-decker fried egg sandwich with sausage and a huge glass of milk. Helen rose from the floor just as her brother was heading toward the stairs. "We going sledding today?" she dared ask. "Rick, Dan, Jim, and I are, yeah." "What about me?" "What about you?" "I want to go. You said we were going to go, you and me." He laughed. "I meant me and the guys." Helen's heart sank. "I want to go. You can't just leave me here alone." "Go get some of your own friends and go. You do have friends, don't you?" "Yeah," she sighed. "So call around and go over to the slope. Bound to be a lot of kids there." The slope was a steep hill located behind the public library. It was perfect for sledding. "We're heading over to Clark's Field." "I want to go to Clark's Field." "It's too steep for you, Brat. Besides, there won't be any other kids your age around. Best if you stick to the bunny slope." Helen pouted and considered working up a fit of tears until something very important occurred to her. She let out a long sigh. "All right, but you better be back before Mom and Dad get home, or I'm going to tell them you left me alone all day." "I will be." He grinned and patted her patronizingly on the head. "Dad will have a cow if I don't have the driveway shoveled out for them." "Will you get my sled out for me?" Ray rolled his eyes. "I suppose, being as it's in the way of mine anyway." Even if she decided not to go to the slope, she still needed Ray to get her sled out for her just in case. It was stored way too high for her to reach. "I'll get my snowsuit on." Ray trudged back upstairs to get his phone and put on socks. By the time he returned, Helen was standing by the kitchen door, warmly dressed and waiting. Ray pulled on his coat and a knit cap. He shoved his big feet into a pair of snowmobile boots, tossed a scarf around his neck, and stuffed a pair of thick mittens into his pocket. "Come on, Brat," he asked, grabbing a solitary key from the pegboard next to the door. Helen scowled. Together they trudged through the snow-filled backyard and around to the side. Helen took giant steps so she could put her feet in the same place as her brother did. It wasn't easy, but she managed without falling over. After kicking enough snow away from the door so it would open, Ray dusted off the padlock and produced the key. He breathed a warm breath on the lock, inserted the key, gave it a twist, and popped the padlock open. With a twist of the latch, the door yawned open, stretching and snapping the remains of one of Summer's webs so dense it reminded Helen of gray cotton candy. It sure was dark in the shed. Helen nibbled her lip and waited, keeping a wary eye on the web. "My sled first," she said. From the darkness, the sound of Ray rummaging around drifted out. She heard the scrape of plastic, probably her orange sled being yanked down from its nail. Ray would probably take the big wooden toboggan. "Here's yours." Helen's ride bounced against the open door and landed halfway outside. She dragged it out of the way. More creaks, thuds, and bangs, a curse word, followed by the satisfying sound of the biggest sled they had being pulled down from the shed's low rafters. "Shit!" Ray yelped. "Holy shit! What the fuck?" Helen's heart skipped a beat. She rushed forward, slammed her body against the door, and pushed it shut. Her mitten-covered hand turned the latch only seconds before something, probably her brother's body, rammed into the other side. "Helen!" he screamed. He pounded on the door, double-fisted, she imagined. "Helen, open the damn door! Jesus Christ, open the door!" But she couldn't. If she opened the door, the spider would get out. Unless, Helen considered, Ray was just being his mean old self and trying to scare her again. Her brother screamed. Something crashed. "There's—" Helen pictured him thrashing about in the pitch black, making as much noise as possible to convince her he was in some sort of real danger. Then again, maybe he was. "Helen, please!" Helen shut her eyes tight. She had to concentrate. She had to stay put, leaning into the door and listening to her brother's struggles, his pleading cries, desperate whimpers, gurgling, then ringing silence. It was the same kind of heavy, grim quiet that had hung in the air after she'd heard the snapping of Princess's bones. She straightened and took a step back. "Ray," she called. "Quit trying to scare me." A snowplow truck, orange and yellow lights flashing, rumbled and scraped down the length of her street. She waited for it to go by. "You okay, Ray?" Ray didn't answer. Helen waited 5 more minutes. Nothing. Dread creeped up her spine and through her arms. What had she done? Helen reached out and twisted the latch. Raymond could get out if he wanted to now, if he were still able. The door creaked open enough to reveal the ominous darkness within the shed. Helen swallowed hard. "Ray?" Something shifted inside. A hair-covered appendage poked out at the top of the doorframe, only long enough for Helen to realize what it was. She ran away, screaming, the bright orange sled forgotten in the snow. Terror filled the rest of her day. Helen sat perched on the sofa, her feet drawn up to her chest. What should she do? What would she say? Would there be anything left of her brother by the time her mom and dad came home from work? Maybe she should call someone. And say what? A giant spider ate my brother? Nobody would believe her. Nobody ever believed her. The police officer took down every lie she told him that night as if it were fact. "We were going to go sledding," Helen had told her parents and the officers. Ray got her sled out first, and Helen had gone while he was still in the shed getting the toboggan out. He wouldn't let her go with him and his friends to Clark's Field, so why wait around? That was the last time she'd seen him, going into the shed to get the toboggan. When she'd come back, she'd left her sled out there because she didn't like spiders and was going to ask her dad to put it back in for her. And, well, her brother hadn't come back. As it got later and later and Ray still didn't return, phone calls started happening. They grew more frantic as the night wore on. When they found the toboggan still in the shed, that confirmed what Jim and the other guys had reported. Ray never showed up. Just as the remains of Princess had never been found, there was nothing to be found of Raymond Spaulding either. It was as if he'd vanished off the face of the earth. Only Helen knew better. She also knew that telling the truth would only land her in the funny farm. Winter yielded to spring. Helen avoided the basement and sheds like never before. She tried to act normal despite the phobia that had ballooned in her head. Mom read something about hypnosis helping people with their fears like Helen's. Dad figured she'd grow out of it eventually. Would it help if we bombed the house, garden, and sheds? Her father asked over lunch. It was the first day of spring, warm enough to leave the doors and windows open. Mom had gone into a cleaning frenzy. Dad had spent the morning in the garage, puttering to stay out of her way. Helen helped her mom when she could. Dad wanted some help in the garage too, but Helen said she couldn't because of the spiders. She looked at him in utter shock. Bombs? You're going to blow the house up? He chuckled. Not that kind of bombs, silly. Bug bombs. They come in a little can. You put them in the middle of the room and they fill the whole place with bug spray. They're good for all kinds of insects, including spiders. We could set off a bunch and then go to the mall and take in a movie and have a late lunch on the food court. When we come back, ta-da, all the bugs are gone, just like that. Helen had never heard of such a thing, but it sounded amazing. Do they really work? Your Grandma Winona swore by 'em. Dad chomped into his grilled ham and cheese. Can we, Mom? Mom didn't look thrilled at the idea. They stink and they get residue all over everything, like the countertops and tables. Please, Mom, I'll help you wipe everything down when we get back, I promise. Helen was willing to do just about anything to get rid of the appalling creatures that plagued her dreams and haunted her every waking moment. Please. Helen's mom and dad exchanged glances. Oh, all right, Mom conceded. Tomorrow, we'll take in the matinee. We haven't been to the movies together in a long time, and it can't hurt, I suppose. Helen's heart sang. Why hadn't anyone suggested this sooner? Princess and Ray would still be alive if they'd done this before. After opening all the interior doors, including the closets, her dad placed a bug bomb in the center of the upstairs hallway. He put 2 more in the living room and dining room. A 4th could be found in the cellar. The garage got one, as did both the outdoor sheds. Jethro was put outside. Helen wanted to help, but her mom said it was too dangerous. Together, they waited in the car until Dad returned from the backyard. All set, he said as he tugged on his seatbelt and started the car. We'll be bug and spider-free when we get home tonight. Mom was right. The house smelled all weird and chemically when they got back from the mall. It was just starting to get dark as Helen's mother dragged the vacuum cleaner from the closet. You're going to do that now? Dad asked with a roll of his eyes. It's only going to take a few minutes. You won't miss your game. Want to start out with a clean slate? Mom answered. We won't know for sure how good a job the bombs did unless we get rid of all the old webs. Helen liked that idea a lot. I can start wiping down the counters, she offered, and hurried into the kitchen for the wash rag and some spray cleaner. None of this was going to bring Raymond or Princess back. Not that she wanted that stupid dog back again, but at least there was hope no one else would be taken. And after this, they could keep an eye on where those new webs would form and get rid of them before the invasion got too bad. Helen may never feel safe outside near the shed again, but at least she could be confident about what was inside. Dad shook his head, sighed, and headed into the living room to wait out the second wave of cleaning. All because of a few little spiders. Despite the rumbles of thunder and flickers of lightning outside her window, Helen snuggled into bed feeling the safest she had in months. Every corner, nook, and cranny of the house had been sucked clean of not just webs, but the dead spiders and their egg sacs that still clung to them. This was how it was meant to be. Well, almost. She wasn't quite ready to let go of the bug netting that draped her bed. You can never be too careful. She smiled as her mother tucked her in for the night. I suppose you're right, her mother replied. You going to be okay? There's a storm coming. Helen gave a confident nod. I'll be fine, Mom. It's just rain. I like thunderstorms. Mom grinned. Just like your father, all right. Sweet dreams. Night, Mom. The light went off. The door was left open. Just a crack. Helen closed her eyes and listened to the storm. Flashes of light penetrated her eyelids, and she counted off the seconds until the growls and booms of thunder came. Gusts of wind shifted the branches of the tree outside. The tips were just long enough to skitter and scrape against the window glass. By the time the rain actually began to drum on the porch roof just outside her window, Helen had fallen into a sound sleep. She stirred from time to time when the wind blew and a gentle tapping tiptoed on her window pane. Helen woke to the gauzy glow of morning sunlight passing through the same bedroom window. It was nothing like the usual harsh glaze her mother created turning on the overhead light. There was no voice telling her to get up. In fact, in her groggy state, Helen didn't hear any sounds at all. Normally, the shower would be running, or she'd hear the buzz of Dad's electric razor. No music drifted up the stairs from the kitchen radio. Mom was not humming or talking to herself. Sitting up, Helen peered through the film of mosquito netting and rubbed her eyes. The protective drapery seemed thicker than normal, as if the layers had been doubled in thickness, maybe even tripled. It was impossible to see much of anything beyond the mosquito net. She yawned as she screwed her knuckles into her eyes again, clearing out the fuzzy morning vision. It didn't work. Instead, what she saw even more clearly welled pure terror into her throat, so thick and sticky Helen could barely take a breath. There was nothing wrong with her eyes. The problem was the room itself. Beyond the veil of innocent netting, her bedroom was cloaked in sparkling gossamer threads, so thick it looked as if someone had sprayed every inch of her room with white cotton candy. Only Helen knew it was anything but spun sugar sweetness. Her bladder suddenly aching, Helen huddled under the dreadful canopy. Maybe this was just another horrible nightmare. "Mommy!" She screamed in an attempt not to draw her mother's attention, but to wake her up. "Daddy!" Her cries for help fell flat as if absorbed by the substance coating her walls. "Mommy! Daddy!" She called again. Fear squeezed her throat. She had to get out of here. She had to find her parents. Every effort to move met with suffocating slowness. Helen moved to the edge of her bed, reached out, and touched the inside of her netting. Getting through meant pulling the opening apart. The very thought of what could be nothing else but spider webbing stretching and snapping pulled bile to the back of her tongue. Whatever had done this was still out there, and there wasn't a doubt in the child's mind what that something was. Her choices were limited. She could sit here and wait for it, or try and escape. "Please don't get me." Her breath rustled the few loose and dangling threads as she reached out to touch the inside of what had gone from a sanctuary to a prison. She had to move with the greatest of care. Spiders sensed their prey by the vibrations they felt in their webs. Drawing in a quivering breath, Helen's fingers gripped the mesh and pulled it apart, breaking thread after delicate thread until the opening was large enough for her to pass through. She turned her head to the side, trying not to breathe on the webbing, then leaned forward to see what may be lurking beyond the enclosure. Helen shivered and listened, eyes darting about the blanketed room. Nothing but layered, white drapes hung from every corner, along the ceiling and across the floor. All the sharp corners were gone, making the room appear round and cocoon-like. That wasn't the worst of it, though. A whimper squeaked in Helen's chest as tears rolled and spilled over in the same moment. She pulled back into the bed. The racing of her heart sent tremors through her entire body. There had to be another way out. The sunlight that glowed through the thick covering over her window drew Helen's gaze. If she could get to it and open it, maybe she could get out. Maybe there were people out there that would help her. Even if she fell, it was better to break an arm or a leg than the fate that awaited her outside her bedroom door. Either way, Helen knew she had to do something. No matter how horrible it might be to attempt her escape, she had to try. Even here, in the place that had always felt the safest, she wasn't safe. Whatever had enshrouded her was big. It would have no trouble getting her when it was ready. But why hadn't it already done so? And why hadn't the bug bombs worked? Maybe there was something about the mosquito nanny that had fooled it. She shuddered as visions of the monstrosity entering her room as she slept and spreading its sticky silken webs all around her filled her head. Sour fear crinkled her stomach. "You have to get out of here." The child swiped her jittery fingers under her eyes, pushing aside the tears that wouldn't stop falling. She needed to be brave. She needed to be strong. For the first time in her brief 10 years of life, there wasn't anyone around to help her. Mommy couldn't squish the spider inside a tissue. Daddy couldn't blast it with spray. Even Raymond wasn't there to take the end of a burning stick to the creature or its web, as she'd seen him sometimes do around the soffits of the shed. Fire! But Helen didn't have any matches in her room. Ray did, though. They were under his underwear with a magazine that had pictures of naked women in it, and Mommy hadn't touched anything in Raymond's room since he'd gone missing. Helen nibbled her bottom lip, considering. Ray's bedroom was right across the hall. After another deep breath, Helen slipped first one bare foot, then the other over the edge of her bed. She kept her feet out, holding them away from the cobwebs for a moment, before ever so slowly lowering them until her toes and the balls of her feet touched the covered floor. It was sticky, not so much that she was stuck for good, but more like someone had spilled a soda on the floor and had not cleaned it up very well. Her eyes remained trained on the doorway. Her ears searched for the faintest hint of movement. Helen moved with agonizing slowness towards the open door on tiptoes. She only wanted a quick peek. She didn't dare call out again. She'd read somewhere that tarantulas were hypersensitive to being breathed on. She didn't know if other spiders were the same, but why take a chance like one exhale in the wrong direction could send her captor scrambling right after her? Instinctively, her hand went to the doorframe. Just as instinctively, it snapped back at the spine-tingling sensation it sent down her arm, yanking a good chunk of the web with it, still stuck in her palm. A shriek almost escaped, but Helen kept her lips firmly shut. She drew her hand away slowly, snapping even more sensitive threads, before wiping the whole mess on her pajama bottoms. With a quick flick of her wrist, the final strands fell away. Note to self, don't touch anything unless you absolutely have to. The thought drew her gaze into the direction of her brother's bedroom door. It was closed. It was also coated with cobwebs, just like her window. Helen looked left toward the end of the hallway. Nothing there but another cobweb-covered window glowing bright with the light of day. To the right, the funnel weaver's lair must lay. The door to her parents' bedroom was open, as was the one to the bathroom across from it. Each one allowed a familiar haze of light into the hallway. Helen desperately wanted to call out to her parents. Even more than that, she wanted to sprint down the hall and rush into their room and feel the safety of their arms around her. She wanted to wake up and know that this was just a dream. Instead, she stood stock still and just listened. She'd messed with the web, but that didn't seem as if it had any effect on anything else. Maybe it was too far away. Would tearing at Ray's doorknob and clawing her way through get the spider's attention? Helen considered the hands that had touched the web. Could she even get through the webbing, or would she do nothing more than help the spider make her its next meal by entangling herself in the door frame? The same could happen if she tried to get out of her own bedroom window. The fact that Ray's door was shut gave Helen some level of hope. It meant the spider probably hadn't gotten in there. There'd be no webs on the window to get in the way. There was the matter of a 10 or 15 drop down to the deck, but again, better to have some broken bones than pulverized ones and all her bodily fluids sucked out of her possibly while still alive. Helen took a half step into the hallway and froze. Further down the hall, beyond the open doors, something rustled. The web down there rippled like the rings made by a stone being dropped into a puddle. Helen swallowed her heart and held her breath. The walls shifted again, the sound loud and shuffling closer. It was coming. Helen lurched forward, thrusting both hands through the sticky gauze, grabbed the knob, twisted it, and pushed on the door. The opening gave, but now she was elbow-deep in webs. Helen's gaze darted down the tube-shaped hall. She could see its 2 front legs. They shifted. Now there were 4 legs and its head. It was scuttling up the stairs. 6 legs became visible. Its abdomen emerged from the dark recesses. Helen screamed. Her arms and legs flailed against the webs. The creature filled the entire hallway. 8 legs propelled it rapidly forward. Helen twisted and pushed, ripped at what felt more like clothesline ropes than thread-thin webs. She fell through, gasping and crying, a shriek piercing the air. Helen rolled to her side and kicked at the open bedroom door, just as the spider's 2 front legs reached where she had been standing only moments before. The door latched. Helen lay flat on her back, breathing so hard the room started to spin. Her pajama bottoms were wet and her bladder empty, but she didn't care. She was safe. Safe for now. Something brushed against the outside of the door, feeling its way around the frame, almost like a dog sniffing. Helen didn't know if spiders had any sense of smell. The shuffling continued a few more minutes before making its way towards the staircase. Only then did Helen's heart begin to return to its normal rhythm, and she let herself drink in one deep breath after another. She turned her head to take in the room beyond the ceiling. She'd been right. There wasn't a single web in sight. Relief-filled tears streamed down Helen's face. She wiped them away and sat up. She was safer, but she wasn't out of danger yet. She still had to get out the window. Then what? If she didn't break a leg, she could run to the neighbor's house. They could call the police, and the police could kill the spider once and for all. Eggs. What about eggs? There was only one solution. Helen pulled herself to her feet and went directly to her brother's dresser. His underwear was still in the bottom drawer. 2 die in house fire. 10-year-old child, sole survivor. Richfield, New York. Fire broke out early Monday morning in an Oneida County home in the village of Richfield. The structure was completely engulfed by the time firefighters arrived. George and Olivia Spaulding perished in the blaze, while their daughter, 10-year-old Helen Spaulding, was able to escape through an upstairs window, resulting in a broken arm, several abrasions, and mild smoke inhalation. Doctors say the girl will make a complete physical recovery, though the trauma she has suffered emotionally has yet to be fully determined. While still under investigation, the blaze is reported to have started in an upstairs hallway, Richfield Fire Chief Robert Nugent said. "We are almost positive this tragedy is a case of a child playing with matches." Upon her release from the hospital, Helen Spaulding will be taken into the custody of her grandparents. Did they find it? Helen's grandmother pulled a set of clothes from the shopping bag and spread them out on the foot of the hospital bed. "I hope these fit all right. We'll do some proper shopping once you're up to it," she commented before looking at the still bruised face of her granddaughter. "Did they find what, hon?" "The giant spider in the house." Her grandmother scowled and pursed her lips. Everyone in the family knew about Helen's phobia. "I don't know," she admitted. "How big of a spider was it?" "Real big. It filled the whole hallway. It killed Mom and Dad. I think it killed Ray, too." Helen's grandmother's body stiffened as she straightened. "Helen, did you start the fire on purpose?" The child nodded. "I had to, Grandma." "That's not what you told the policeman. Why would you do such a thing?" Helen frowned. "Because spiders, Grandma. I had to kill the spiders. You don't have any spiders in your house, do you?" You have just listened to Postcards from Barnesville,
with Pamela Morris, that witchy chick. A place for free short stories that otherwise may have spent their dark lives lonely and unloved. Please subscribe and hit that like button if you enjoyed this reading and to keep the stories coming. Be sure to check your mailbox for another postcard from Barnesville, from that witchy chick soon. And thank you for listening.